Hi there, I'm Chris Devine, and this is my review of Tech 21's Geddy Lee DI-2112 Signature Preamp Pedal. A few years back, Geddy Lee of Rush partnered with Tech 21 and created the rack mount Geddy-2112 rack mount preamp. Not long after, the YYZ pedal appeared, bringing that same type of sound in a smaller form factor. There are a lot of bass players out there that don't happen to have a rack mount bass amp system, and some players might want a bit more options and flexibility than what a pedal usually has due to the smaller size. So Geddy Lee and Tech 21 came up with all the options of the rack mount and the small form factor in the Geddy Lee DI-2112. To say that Geddy Lee of Rush has a unique bass sound would be an understatement. Regardless if it's his 4001 Rickenbacker or his 72J bass, one note and you know it's him. When he partnered up with Tech 21, his elusive sound became far more available, and the DI-2112 preamp shares that tone with bass players of a variety of different backgrounds. The top-mounted controls cover blend, mid, drive, treble, bass, and mid shift. You're probably wondering about this little deep section over here, which has its own level and saturation controls. Now, this area has Geddy Lee's EQ curve set to his preference, but it does allow the user to tweak the level and saturation to their own taste. Simply put, it's a dual set of signals. See what I did there? And they're running in parallel, the deep and the drive. We have a small bank of buttons also that cover a mute, a tight option, a plus 10 dB boost for the 1/4 inch outputs, and a minus 20 dB pad for the XLRs. And to finish it off, it's also got a ground switch. The blue LED indicates power and pulses during the playing. Indicates that the device is outputting signal. Now, it can not only run off of a standard 9-volt power supply, but for added headroom, an 18-volt power source is the way to go, and it can also be powered by 2 9-volt batteries as well. The backside has the input as well as a selection of 1/4 inch outputs. One's dedicated for the tuner. The other ones are for the mix, drive, and a deep out. And then also we happen to have some XLR outputs for the drive and the deep signal paths, and it gives plenty of options for connectivity. The bass I'm using today is a modest Yamaha BB404, but I spent some time at Peak 15 Productions a while back, and the owner of the studio is a great bassist who happens to be a big Rush fan and a huge Geddy Lee fan. He also happens to have a very great bass collection, and we put this minty green monster through its paces with a hot-rodded Warmoth J bass with DiMarzio pickups and a Nostrand active EQ, a Rickenbacker 4001, as well as a fretless Phil Kubicki X Factor, and of course, a Geddy Lee signature Fender jazz bass. Tech 21's manual includes suggested settings to start from, and thankfully, using Mr. Lee's standard setting, we were blown away right off the start. It's got just the right balance of grit on the top end while maintaining a warm and yet deep low end. The drive control really has a very strong presence at the higher settings. After 2 o'clock, it can really bring in the dirt. But if you kick in the tight function button, it really added a lot more definition. It really tamed those lower frequencies on the drive side of things. Hotter pickups and active electronics obviously push things a bit harder, meaning dialing the drive end and some of the EQ settings back a bit overall, depending on your taste. We found it was getting really slammed from the beginning, and it was a lot to go through. Comparatively, passive versions really didn't need to be pushed very hard on the EQ, but when we started digging in deeper with the EQ, the audio quality was maintained with no issues like noise or hiss or anything like that. We got into some of our own tonal tweaking, and we were quite amazed at the EQ's ability to sculpt sounds that had that classic bass stack tone as a foundation. But it was flexible enough to adjust for the variety of basses we used. Getting crystal clear bass tones via a DI has always been pretty easy, but getting those warmer and overdriven tones always meant reamping or adding in a mic and amp setup. And Tech 21's background in getting great DI tones really came through here. And it's far easier and simpler to get those really elusive, natural, and classic tubey bass sounds without a lot of extra effort or hardware. Shooting for cleaner tones was not a problem either. If you lower the drive settings, the big and deep bass sounds still reside there, but you get a little bit more clarity and definition. It's not super sterile clean, but it's glassy, it's smooth, and it still has some warmth to it. While using the fretless Kubicki, we were able to nail a really nice woody-ish tone that would have been perfect for like a little jazz combo type of situation. And there's plenty of room in there in between the aggressive sound that Geddy Lee has and that warmer, smoky sound that we really got out of that. So depending upon the bass and what you're shooting for, there's a lot in here. Now, the overall audio quality is superb. It's an all analog design, meaning there's no modeling or anything like that. There's no latency, there's no lag. It maintained a full feeling connection. It felt like it was part and parcel of the bass sound, and it didn't feel like it was layered on there like when we were making EQ adjustments to tailor the tone. There was plenty of flexibility, and you didn't feel like you were fighting the frequencies. With the multiple outputs, the options can get very interesting. It could easily be used in a live setting, running the mix drive out to a bass amp and connect the XLRs to the PA system. It's essentially a D-racked or desktop version of the DI-2112 rack mount unit, and it can easily be paired with a power amp as well. It's small, as you can see. It's a little bigger than the average stomp box size, but it also fits really nicely into a gig bag. So if you're backlining at shows or using any house gear of any sort, this is something you really don't want to leave home without when you really want that nice, warm, classic bass tone, and you don't know what you're going to be getting when you get to the gig. Will it make you play like Geddy Lee? Unfortunately, no. However, his sound is in here, and it's available to players that are really shooting for that. So it's not a big deal whatsoever. There are a lot of other sounds in here as well too. In fact, the manual gives some great examples of Jack Bruce and Les Claypool and John Paul Jones and John Entwistle and Chris Squire. Well, it's not surprising considering Geddy Lee considers a lot of these players some of his favorite players, and they have that tone in here because this is definitely one of those ways of recreating a classic bass stack sound without having to haul a classic bass stack around. So if you're shooting for those types of sounds, maybe not Geddy Lee, but maybe something more into the 8x10 tube-driven bass head, yeah, this is definitely one of those ways you can do it with a lot less stress and a lot less backache. Pros and cons. Pros, there's excellent EQ flexibility. There's plenty of usable and practical bass drive and dirt tones in there. It's definitely a must if you're a Rush fan and a Geddy Lee fan. If you are in a Rush tribute band, this will make your life a lot easier. There's plenty of connectivity options as well for how you use it live or in the studio, so you shouldn't have any problem there. Cons, none. If this really does exactly what it's supposed to do, and you've got that great classic driven bass tone in a box, and it nails it. And you've got a lot of places you can go with this. So well worth checking out. The street price is $329. So when you get a chance, check this out at tech21nyc.com. Thanks a lot. Take care.